then we get started directly. If you would go to the next slide, again, I think it's just the speaker overview. Yeah, these are our faces. Our expert today, Ingo Reinhardt, co-founder and managing director at Buynomics, accompanied now today with Doug, Hampshire, head of customer value at Buynomics, and my name is Jonathan. I'm working in the marketing function here. And then quickly on Buynomics, if you would go there, Ingo. At Buynomics, we help companies make smarter and faster decisions in revenue growth management, or short RGM. Our virtual shopper AI technology simulates real shopper behavior with up to 95% predictive accuracy. We enable holistic optimization of pricing, promo, PPA, portfolio mix, and costs, while accounting for competitive dynamics and retailer pressures. And our customers, including Nestle, Unilever, L'Oreal, see up to 4% higher gross profits and save up to 90% of their time spent on analysis. If you want to tackle your RGM challenges together, you can book a demo or just write us and we find time to connect. And without further ado, I would say we have a great topic today on price elasticities. We had a lot of registration, I think close to 500 again. And now the stage is yours, Ingo.
Thanks, Jonathan, for the introduction. Thanks, Doug, for supporting us later with a demonstration. And thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar. I think we have an interesting topic here today, talk about price elasticities. I think it's a webinar that we've done a few times, but I think the last time was more than a year ago. So I think it's time again to talk about the topic. And I think currently the topic of price elasticities is probably, particularly in headline news, getting more attention than some of us would like to have. And that's, I think, why it's important to talk about it. And what we'll do is introduce the topic, just give an introduction. I think we have a very broad range of participants with different expert levels. So we want to do like a basic introduction of the topic, go through that very quickly, and then talk about some of the challenges, applications, and then I'll hand over to Doug, talk about what we think is the next step in generalizing the idea of the price elasticity. So looking forward to an interesting webinar here. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat. We're happy to answer them at the end of the session, and really looking forward to this topic. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And as I already mentioned, the topic of price elasticity is really in the news. Here we just put up a random example from the US. Eggflation, as many of you probably remember, a while ago, a couple of weeks, egg prices had risen sharply. And the topic of price elasticity was very prominent in this context, because also prices had risen massively, demand had dropped not by a lot. So as you can see here from this article, prices rose about 230%, while demand more or less stayed flat or just went down a little bit, indicating, if you just apply a traditional price elasticity, a value very close to zero. And this is something that we see across many categories, particularly about essential goods like eggs in this case. They're particularly in the short and midterm. They can be very inelastic if the whole category increases in price. But if you are the only egg seller in this example, when everyone else stays flat in their pricing, if you're the only one to increase prices, your elasticity will be much, much higher than the near zero value indicated by these numbers here. And that's something that we see in many categories, that categories as a whole can be very inelastic if all prices are increased, but can be very elastic if you're the only one increasing price, because people will jump to alternatives. So this is something that is important, and here's just an example. The tariff discussion also relies heavily on elasticities as another example, where the amount of initial tariffs, I think, was strongly influenced by a price elasticity analysis, but we won't go too much into that detail in this webinar. We will only look at an implication of how tariffs can affect pricing and how that relates to price elasticity. All right, so why do we need price elasticities? I think the need is very obvious, and we want to show it here with this simple example. So as many of us are working in revenue management, sales, marketing, this should come as no surprise to you. So much of what we do has to do with a product offering, a portfolio here indicated by these 3 products, product 1 to 3. There are target shoppers, and based on the shopper's willingness to pay, they will or will not buy some of these products, right? And we want to understand how the sales change if we change the price, because in the end, we want to optimize things like profit, revenue, market share, whatever the organization is aiming for. So, and to be able to do that, traditionally, many professionals have relied on a very simple, I would say, measure on how to capture the dynamics of what's going on here. So the real dynamics are a bit more complicated because typically we have not just 3 products, but we have many products. Shoppers choose between products, but we want to have a simple way to capture the essence of these dynamics in ideally in a single number. And this is essentially what the price elasticity does. What does it do? So if you look at these shoppers here from the previous slide, and what we've done here in this graph, and this essentially the standard price sales or the demand graph, where we have price on the x-axis, sales on the y-axis, and we have sorted these shoppers here at the bottom by their willingness to pay, where the people to the very right have a very high willingness to pay, the people to the very left have a low willingness to pay, and they're sorted here by their willingness to pay. And if we decrease price, some of these red people here will turn this blue-purple color. If we go to increase the price, the line moves to the right, and some of them will become red and don't buy the product anymore. And this is essentially what happens when we create a demand function. We sort all the people by their willingness to pay, and then essentially we count how many of these will buy a product at a certain price. And what the price elasticity then essentially does is it compares the change in the price with the change in sales volume, and does this by essentially dividing the percentage change in sales by the percentage change in price. And this is the price elasticity, and this is an indication for how sensitive the demand, the shoppers are to a price change. In this example, if we increase the price by 1%, sales drop by 2%, and this results in a price elasticity of -2. So what we've done, and this is, I think, a key idea here, we have essentially or implicitly reduced the complexity of the full market that we've shown on the previous slide, just with 3 products, typically with dozens of products in a category, into a single number, the price elasticity, that tells us how price sensitive this product is. And once we've done this, we can do lots of things with it. So in this case here with a price elasticity of -2, what we have, and I think this is one of the most relevant insights or things to know about a price elasticity. If we know the price elasticity of a product, we can easily compute its profit optimal price, because in the profit optimal price, margin times elasticity is -1. So in this example here, we have a price elasticity of -2, costs of the product are 100 euros, then the profit optimal price is at 200 euros with a 50% margin, because 50%, that's 0.5, times -2 is -1. So if we live in a world where there's only one product, we know its price elasticity everywhere. Pricing is super simple, right? We can just compute the profit optimum. Likewise, we can compute the revenue optimum. The revenue optimum is where price elasticity is just -1. And depending on our strategy, we can choose a price typically between those 2 points. So if we live in a world where there's just one product, no interaction with other own products in our portfolio or with competitors, no change, that's all there is to know. Sadly, but also luckily for us, that's not the world we live in. If that was the world we lived in, then we wouldn't really have a job here, because that's really all there's to do about it. But I think it's important as a starting point. So what are other things we can take from this? Another thing we can take from this is, and this is particularly, I think, important in the day-to-day work, because almost all the products we will have to price already exist. There are always some new or some that we're replacing, but most of the products we have already exist in the market. And one of the key questions is, we have a change in costs. How do we then adjust our price as a result? And there we also have a direct, I think this is the next most important thing to know about price elasticities, how to use them to compute the reaction to a cost change. And here, that's important. It doesn't just depend on the elasticity, but also it depends on the type of demand function we have. And I think the two most relevant ones are linear demand here, the green curve, and exponential demand, the red curve. Linear is the one that we just had on the previous slide. Exponential is the one that has a constant price elasticity everywhere, and this looks about like this. And when you work with elasticity tables, where you just have product name, price elasticity, you're sort of implicitly assuming this world where you have constant price elasticity. What are the implications? So we have the product from the previous page where we have costs of 100, a profit optimal price of 200, and the question is now, costs increase from 100 to 110. How should I change my price to stay in the profit optimal price? And this depends, as I said, here on the type of demand function. For linear demand, what you do is you pass on, as you can see from this formula here, half of the cost increase. So if costs go from 100 to 110, your profit optimal price should increase by half of the 10 cost increase, so from 200 to 205. If you are in a world with constant price elasticity, then your margin has to stay the same. That means you pass on the percentage change in your cost. In this case, you go from 100 to 110. That means your costs increase by 10%. Likewise, your profitable optimal price increases by 10%. And that means you go from 200 to 220. And as you can already see here, it's not sufficient to just know the price elasticity. You also need to know the type of demand function you have. As the difference in adjustment, you go from 200 to 205 versus you go from 200 to 220, is already quite significant. And this indicates that it's important to also understand what world we're living in. And these are things that can be found out empirically, or where there are good indications from other products, what shape this demand function typically has. All right, let's make this practical. And as I indicated, let's take a look at a tariff example. So still working with the same example we had previously. What I did is I just put in more specific numbers. So put in the parameters for the demand function here. We have our price elasticity. We can validate that at a price of 200. This gives us an elasticity of -2, as in the previous example. So we're just looking here at the linear demand case. And now what happens? We look at this case here where we have a profit optimal price of 200. We have manufacturer cost of $100. We have a retailer discount of 30% from the 200. So the retailer before tariffs buys at 140. Again, this is all very simplified. And this net price at which the retailer buys is also the import value on which the tariff is applied, right? So this is how this example worked. Of course, there are many variations, but we just want to look at the implications of such a tariff and how it relates to price elasticity in this example. So in the world without a tariff, here we have shelf price 200, and the total profit is $33.3 thousand. So we also see that we already switched from euros to dollars for this example here. This is the total profit. And now in a world with a 10% tariff on the net price here, we can see that we have to adjust our profit optimal price. In this case, from 200 to 204. I'll come back to that later. So if you do this, you see all of the implications on profit and so on. You see that you have a price increase of 2%. In this case, very slim, I would say, just 2% versus the 10% tariff increase if the price stays profit optimal. But what you see, and this is really the main issue for most, is that you already have a massive loss in combined profit of manufacturer and retailer. And you see that if you round properly, that the sum of these two numbers is a little less than the previous profit retailer and manufacturer had. So the sum of profit manufacturer and retailer plus the tariff is less than what manufacturer and retailer had. And this results from the fact that we have to have a higher price. So there's a little bit less in sales compared to previously. And this is reflected in a total loss in benefit here. So this we see here in this example. Why, if you paid attention on the previous slide, why is the increase here not half of the tariff that's paid here, about $14, $15, but it's a bit less. And this is because the amount of tariff in this example depends on the shelf price, right? Because through the retailer discount, it's connected to the shelf discount, to the shelf price, and because of this, we need to make an adjustment. If you go through the math, I just did it last night. It's a really fun thing to do, honestly. And you will see that there's an adjustment. So the profit optimal price, because the tariff is higher for higher price increases, is a little less than what is indicated on this slide here, where you have just a fixed cost increase that doesn't depend on the final price. So as you can see, this is a super simple example here. You can already see that it gets, if you go through it in detail, it's already getting massively difficult to get the math right. And that's also why we're working a lot with a preset tool that already covers all of this. But it's important to understand the implications. And I think one of the core implications here is if you see the almost 14% loss in profit, combined profit here, that if tariffs go up, if the tariffs double, this loss here almost also doubles. So this is almost linear. And I think this is a reason for concern and why this topic is very important. And how does it relate to price elasticities? The effect on sales is much higher for products with high elasticity, and there you also have a higher impact for everyone involved. And in this example, we only looked at manufacturer and retailer together, because how it's then split between the parties, of course, depends a lot on the power balance between them. And of course, for a realistic example, it gets much more complicated, because you will have some parties, some brands, products that are affected by tariffs, others will not be affected by tariffs. So there's a whole mixture of effects, and getting all the dynamics right is, of course, very difficult, and that's what Doug will show you in just a minute. All right, Jonathan, I think we have the first survey question here.
Yes, we have the first survey question. Let me quickly find it here and launch it. And to all, I will read this now for all joining by phone. To what extent do tariffs or external cost pressures currently influence your pricing decisions? And the answer options are very significantly, significantly, moderately, slightly, not at all, or not answering. I see a lot of participants already. We're at 40% now. I think I give you around 15 more seconds, and then we can look at the results together. We're at 60% now. Okay, final time to lock in your choices, and I will show them to you now. And poll, share results. And the winner is significantly Ingo. Did you expect that?
Or let's ask Doug first.
I think there's a very small that say very significantly, and we're all sort of in the significantly, moderately, and slightly. I'm not sure if I could point out the difference between moderately and slightly, but it seems like everyone's in the same realm of it's going to affect us, but some sort of great deal of uncertainty, which is unsurprising.
Yeah, makes sense. I think moderately, slightly is probably more for the linguists, what the difference. But I would have thought more people in significant and very significant. But so I think it's probably less relevant than it appears in like the public But that's, I think, also a good sign. So that I think that professionals have a more realistic picture of what's going on and how to deal with it. All right, let's move on. Should I turn it off, Jonathan?
I think the poll is turned off. You can continue.
And just okay. All right. So I think those were the topics where using price elasticities makes sense. So as we said, they're used to simplify the complexity of market dynamics into a single number to make it workable for analysts. And historically, without going into too much detail here, but historically that idea of simplifying like the complexity of market dynamics into a single number or few numbers, that's something that really comes from a paper and pencil era. So where people had to rely on working out the dynamics on a piece of paper and didn't really have access to large data sets. That's why they worked with sample data and so on, large data sets and fast computing. That's really the world where elasticities, linear regressions and so on come from. But moving forward with much better access to data, much better methods and access to fast computing, it's also important to note the limitations of these simplifying or complexity reducing concepts. And we'll come to some of these limitations now. So I think one that's really important is in the context of promotions. And what you see here is essentially, and it's based on real data, it's anonymized, but it's based on real observations. You see these dots first, if you ignore the lines for a minute, and you see this product essentially has, and each dot represents the average price in a certain week. And you see that there are lots of dots here around the 6 euros, lots of dots here around 5 euros, and some at 3 euros. And what's behind that is that there was an initial price of around 5 euros here for the product, and it was then increased to 6 euros. And they occasionally ran promotions here at roughly 50% discount at the 3 euro here. And what you see if you then compute the price elasticities of this product, it's not really clear what it is, right? So if you look at the main line here, the bold line that goes to the 5 and 6, it looks like it has at the 6 a very high price elasticity of minus 4.8. And you can also see, and the same linear demand curve has an elasticity of minus 0.7 here at the 3 euros. And it has, depending on where to start, if you go to a promotion and you start at the old price at 6, go to the 3 euros, you have a price elasticity of around minus 3.3. If you go from 5 to 3, you have a price elasticity of minus 2.2. So what we're showing here is it's particularly in the case of a promotion where you not only have the price effect, but also the promotion effect. It's not really clear what the right price elasticity is for this product here and what to work with, because it differs from where you start. Are you computing from 6 or from 5 euros? And why is that? Because what's really going on here is that because the promotion doesn't lay on the same demand function, but because of the promotion effect, so if you have leaflets or if you have another positioning in the store, you sort of have a level shift of the demand curve. So the demand curve shifts, so you have more demand at each price point. This is the promotion effect, and therefore you are at a different curve, and you really need, if you want to properly understand the effect of a promotion here, you need to work with these different demand functions. That means that for a promotion, it's really increasingly difficult to work with price elasticities. The same is, and I'll go quickly through these, the same is true, price elasticity, and this relates to the egg example from the beginning, differs widely depending on what type of price change you have. If you have just the price change of a single product, the price elasticity is different from having a price change together with a promotion. Or if you move the whole category, the price elasticity is typically much lower, as you saw in this egg example. So there's typically not one price elasticity, but the price elasticity not only depends on the product, but it depends on the whole context, what other prices are changed. And this is typically very poorly captured in this price elasticity number. Likewise, price elasticities have if you want to compare these with other methods like behavioral pricing, or you want to look at individual product features, how does a size change of a product affect demand? These things are very difficult to capture in a price elasticity. So when we think a bit broader about revenue growth management and not just price changes, price elasticities become increasingly a poor tool to answer these questions. And this is why we will next move to a questions and then to the next steps here. Jonathan, should we do the poll quickly?
Yes, if you click another time on the spacebar, yes. Here's the second question popping up on the screen. Let me launch the second and final poll of today for everyone joining by phone. The question is, what's the biggest limitation you experience when using price elasticities in your work? Are they hard to measure? They do not reflect shopper behavior, real shopper behavior. They ignore portfolio and competitor effects, and the opposite, they're useful. I don't see any major issues. Time to log in your answers. We're at 40% right now. I'll give you 15 more seconds, and I think we have 2 winners at the moment, which I will share with you. Okay, 3, 2, 1, and I'm ending the poll now and sharing the results. Doug, Ingo, who wants to start?
Doug, you want to say something?
Yeah, exactly what I would have chosen. The difficulty in measuring those reliably, and I think very connected with that, the fact they ignore to some extent the portfolio and competitor effects. I would say probably that they don't ignore, they sort of intrinsically have them and you can't really isolate them, i.e. they're difficult to measure reliably. So definitely see both of those.
Yeah, same here. I think those are in what in our work what we see as the most relevant limitations, and I think it's a good validation that we're getting the same result here as well. All right. So before we move to Doug, just very quickly, if we come back to the original idea of when we started, why did we introduce price elasticity, or why are we using them in the field? And why we're using them, because we want to understand the market complexities, having different products, having a range of shoppers, and we want to make that understandable and workable. And there was the motivation for price elasticities. And as I said, they come from a time where people had to do work with paper and pencil, and therefore they had to be very simplistic. But there's a price you pay for the simplicity, and that is that they're, as we showed, not very well and not very good in understanding the differences between moving a single and many products, and so on. And therefore, what we built, or what we are suggesting as an alternative, is really generalizing this idea of a price elasticity, and not just looking at a single product and not just looking at the price, but looking at really the features, the value drivers that make up products, and creating what we call virtual shoppers that give really users the flexibility to understand all kinds of changes. And just very much in a nutshell, it generalizes the elasticity in that shoppers don't just have a willingness to pay for a single product, but they have willingness to pay, or utilities, preferences, and behaviors for all kinds of products, product attributes. And based on that, they make decision between products, and that allows us to also understand what happens if you change a feature in a product, you increase the size of a bottle or decrease it. You can understand how a price change in one product affects also the other products, because it becomes less or more attractive, and then shifts up other products, demand curves, and so on. So this is really the idea and the technology underneath the demo that Doug will now show. And that really generalizes the idea of a price elasticity. Oops. So I stop.
Great. Thanks very much. And yeah, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Just want to kind of whiz through a quick demonstration of an example using some anonymized data of what one of my clients was facing recently, and how we work through some of the challenges with that. So what I'll take us through is the approach that we went through to understand, okay, how does price elasticity change, and how does it affect a real portfolio or optimization in terms of pricing? So this is the Buynomics platform, and the first thing I want us to do is to look at a very, very simple example. So here's all our products on the left-hand side, the price that's been set in the market in comparison to the kind of base scenario and the resulting units and the percentage change in units, and then revenue, and to the right, we've also got profit there as well. So what I did is, and what we wanted to do is understand the elasticity for two of their products. Okay, so what we did is we made a 6% price change for two of their products, and that results in an elasticity of -1.9 and -1.3. Okay, they're fairly sensible elasticities. That makes sense. And now we can start to make decisions. Well, can we? Because what actually happened was they introduced a new product into that portfolio. So they took the same price increase and they introduced a new product. So they took a 6% price increase and they introduced a new kind of budget EDLP product, which was a €1 product. And you can see this is the new product that's been introduced. These were our previous elasticities, -1.9, 1.3, the response of our shoppers to the change in the price. But what happens? Look what happens when we introduce that budget brand or budget sort of product, EDLP, €1, our elasticities suddenly go through the roof. We're suddenly losing far more in terms of volume than we were previously with a simple price change. Why is that? Well, of course, that's because this particular product is gaining a large share in units. And you can see we're losing significant numbers of units in comparison to our original scenario. So therefore, our price elasticity has changed. But is it really a pure price elasticity? Well, not exactly, right? Because we're sort of encompassing in these numbers, -5, -4.5, this additional effect of adding a new product in the portfolio. And that's just one example. Another thing that we were looking at was what happens when you add in a competitor price change. So as with lots of things in today's market, you're not taking price in isolation. So we're back into our original scenario with our price elasticity, -1.9, -1.3. But here you can now see we've got other competition products which have made a price change, and they are selected brands. You can see very innovatively named 6, 9, and 5. They've taken some price increases, and we have some resulting elasticities. You'll see that not every product here has an elasticity and not every brand. And that's because for us, elasticity is really a behavioral choice. It's kind of this behavioral AI model that we've got resulting in unit purchases of our virtual shoppers. And that means if you don't make a price change, you don't get an elasticity. And now what we want to do is we want to say, okay, these were our previous price elasticities. We've now got a competitor change. How do we go about optimizing our price changes in relation to that? Well, one of the things we can do very, very easily, as demonstrated here, is run roughly 1,000 different scenarios, look at my units versus my profit for every given price change scenario, and basically plot the best given price change for myself. Now, probably up here is a 20% increase in profit, but circa 17% loss in units. That's not going to be so great. So we would have to choose one in the middle here where we have a trade-off. So how do we calculate the optimal response for those two? Well, let's go back and let's have a look at what that optimal response might have been. So in this case, the optimal response for our products and how that elasticity actually changed during that response is quite significant. So actually the optimal response is a 3% price increase for one of my products and a 10% price increase for another. That means that I've actually got a positive elasticity on one of the products and a negative elasticity on the others. Not something that you would conventionally see when you do your analysis. Generally you go to your manager, the director, the CEO, and say our product has a price elasticity. Champagne gets poured and you can increase the price as much as you want. But that's only because of the other changes that are in the market. And how does that result in terms of units? Well, we're down less in units. We're down less in terms of revenue. In fact, we're increasing our revenue compared to our initial scenario. And of course, the profit for the manufacturer also significantly increases in that final example. So it's just a real kind of demonstration of how elasticity is it's great for insight, but terrible for instruction. And I think what we try and do is give you an understanding of how those numbers change and modify in every given market situation and give you the tools to optimize the correct response. I think that's kind of all I wanted to go through, and we'll go to some of the questions now. If I can work out how to stop sharing my screen, and we'll go to the Q&A.
Hey, have you found the button to unshare?
Not yet, but I'll get there. So maybe Jonathan, you can ask the first question, whilst I'll try and find the Zoom.
We got a lot of questions in the Q&A section and in the chat. So thanks again, everyone, for your engagement. Or Ingo, do you still have some slides? No. I think we start with one which is more broad. Ingo, you're on mute, by the way.
You see my presentation now, or?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a question on inflation from Jose, which is basically your take on the effect of inflation on RGM in total and price elasticity.
Doc, you want to say?
Yeah, I think I'm frozen, so you carry on whilst I try and deal with my end, and then I'll jump in a second.
Okay, so I think from what we see, it has inflation means that essentially that everything is getting more expensive, and that means that elasticities, as in this egg example, tend to be lower than if you do the same price change in an environment without inflation.
Yeah, and what I would say, I think I'm back now, so thanks for your patience. What we see is generally when we have this inflationary environment, what you need to try and do is detrend for both. So you need to detrend for this increasing prices, and generally what we have also seen is increasing demand. So you have increasing prices and increasing demand. Now you can't suddenly say we've got a price elasticity that's positive, because you don't. Ultimately, if you increase your prices outside of what's happening in the market, you would see a negative elasticity. So you need to try and really isolate that price effect, which is incredibly difficult to do with the traditional methods.
Thanks for your answers. Another question, a little bit more detailed from Yuking. Do you have any good best practice for FMCG price elasticity in terms of SKU level or also category level?
I think we can show both. And I think that depends on what you want to do with it. So you have the individual SKU elasticity or product elasticity when you need this. If you want to make an individual decision, if you understand how the whole market or the whole category works, then the brand or category elasticities become more relevant.
Yeah, and what we've also done for people, and what I see people doing as well, is kind of isolating what is a pure product elasticity. So what is the response of my shoppers to the changing price of the product, and actually what is my brand elasticity, and that is more what is the response when I change the price of my whole brand, of shoppers moving in and out of those brands. That's likely going to be less because you've got switching between the products in your brand. And that's what's often helpful for people, is saying, okay, like this product in my portfolio is very elastic, but my brand as a whole is very strong and therefore inelastic because people just switch between products.
A question directly tackling your answers, basically, just in from Stefano. Do you analyze and isolate cross elasticity on FMCG products?
I think from our perspective, we actually try and move people away. I know we've spoken a lot about elasticity. What we try and focus on is the pure like unit changes. So the number of the elasticity -1.9 is kind of a real simplification, because what you want to look at is the change in unit volumes for that product, but not only that product, for every other product in the portfolio and in the market that you're competing with or against.
Now, there's also another question tackling exactly on this point. It's are there any best practices of getting senior leaders to understand price elasticity more of an output than an input?
I can just very briefly add on some of my expertise and insight. What we are what we don't do and don't mishear us is say, ignore price elasticity as a concept completely, because it is really helpful for your C-level leaders to be able to understand, okay, in general, my products in response to demand do this. Like, that is a helpful number. They probably understand it. It's probably easier to explain than a really more technical concept. But at the working level, when defining strategies, it is important to understand the nuances of the responses of your shoppers' behavior to changes in prices, portfolio promotions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's important. More senior leaders will have less to do with the topics. I think maybe now it's more on their mind because it makes headline news. But as Doug said, for the technical teams, they need the precision, they need the movements, also what Doug showed in the example in the demo between products and so on. And for senior managers, I mean, you can have, I would say, like qualitatively to say this product is more elastic than that, or this is an elastic product. That certainly is a true statement. It's something we can say. It's more difficult to say the elasticity of this product is minus 1.7, because that depends on what else is going on in the market. But you can always, there are elastic and more and less elastic products. That's certainly true, and that's something that also makes sense to share and communicate with senior managers.
Okay. Thank you. We got a lot more questions. I would say we take them up, curate them, brainstorm together, and answer them afterwards, looking at the time, because I have still something that I want to share with the audience that is here. And that's the new webinar that we have in 3 weeks, which is not a normal webinar, not just an expert webinar, but a panel discussion. And just a short anecdote, I think in the past 2 months, I had at least 5 people in my LinkedIn direct messages asking about, hey, another webinar, another session on the topic of price pack architecture. Please talk more about this. And we got together and thought on a session, Rethinking Price Pack Architecture, Strategies from the Inside the Industry, with 3 speakers, 3 panelists this time, with expertise or experience working for Friesland Campina, Diageo, Pladis, and Danone. Really excited to talk about PPA again. And with that, I'd say thank you very much, Ingo. Thank you very much, Doug. I think it was an amazing session. And thank you, everyone, for joining again. We had a lot of people here, a lot of questions, a lot of engagement. It's always a pleasure to see the community coming together and talking and discussing, and hope to catch you in the next session, everyone.